Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Roadmaster Universal Wiring Kit for towed vehicles. And this is going to be a different option than you're typically used to for light functions. A lot of times on a flat towed vehicle, you're going to be running diodes, and that's going to tap into your factory taillights. The old school method of bulb and socket, of having its own separate bulb and its own system and tapping that into the taillight, just doesn't work very well anymore. A lot of taillights, you run the risk of drilling through, having moisture build up, and a lot of them just don't have space to be able to account for that in the taillight pocket. And that's where these 10-inch LED strips come into play. These two strips are side specific, but they're going to allow you to have your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights, and it's going to run to a 4-pole in the front of your vehicle. On today's vehicle, we actually tied it into a 6-pole, so you still have that availability, but these are quite a bit brighter than normal just diodes and a taillight. They actually illuminate pretty well, so if you've ever seen a flat tow vehicle out on the road at nighttime, sometimes they're pretty dull until the brakes are actually depressed, and even then it's still a little dim. It's not the case here. These are 152 lumen, so they really stand out, which is good when you're towing, and that way people can see what you're doing, and it's going to keep you safe and legal. Now, being that these stay on the outside of your vehicle, they're nice and flush. They really don't stand out too much as far as distance, which is good, because once they're adhered with the 3M adhesive, they're going to be on your vehicle and stick on there very well. And as far as durability goes, these are IP68 rated, so that means they've been tested through a bunch of different tests to make sure that long term they're going to hold up. And just like any Roadmaster product, they're high quality and made in the USA. So these are going to be a really good option. If you don't want to splice into those factory taillights, you can completely omit that, and this is going to do it for you. And also, just looking at the kit, there's quite a few components in there to make it really easy. Roadmaster did a good job of designing this to make this beginner friendly. So if you're a little bit worried on the cutting and splicing of a normal diode, this omits that. This saves a lot of different problems that traditionally you have with diodes. So this could definitely be a good option for your flat towed vehicle. Now, as far as installation, we're going to be doing the installation on this vehicle, and just because you don't have a Lincoln Corsair, that's totally fine, because it's going to follow the same process. Because this is its own system and you're not splicing in, just follow along, and step by step you'll be able to get this installed on your vehicle in no time. Now let's take a look at the individual pieces of the kit, and then I'll show you how to get this installed on your vehicle. We're going to be doing this on a Lincoln Corsair, but it's going to be the same concept when it comes to your vehicle, so you can follow the same steps to get yours installed. So starting off, obviously we have our lights. Now these are going to be 10 inches long, which is going to be nice because not only will you be able to mount this to where you get people behind you seen, but also on the sides as this kind of wraps around our bumper. And it's all going to be sealed up here, so as this lives on the outside of our vehicle, it's meant to meet standards to be able to hold up to that weather long term. Roadmaster's done their own testing, and it seems like these just keep going and going because they are sealed up. So there's plenty of LEDs here that are going to illuminate really well, and that's kind of an issue sometimes you see when flat towing at night, is the lights on the towed vehicle are pretty dim, and these are going to change that. It's going to make it a lot nicer. Now, when it comes to each of these, they are going to be specific as far as side. So we'll see here that we have driver side tag, and that's just going to keep the wires all cohesive once we get those installed. And all the wires are going to be jacketed, which is really nice, and they're already pre-stripped, and there's solder on here to make some nice good connections. That's a really nice touch that Roadmaster did to just make this that much easier. And as far as the lights mounting up, there's going to be 3M VHB adhesive, and if you've never used the VHB, this is really, really good stuff. You know, you just put a little bit of pressure on there, and these things are going to be on there until you're ready to take them off, and even taking them off can be a little bit difficult because this adhesive is so good. So obviously you have a light for each side, and those are going to just mount up, and then we'll run those wires in to where we can make our connections to our main harness. The main harness is also labeled as driver and passenger, and we already have those pre-stripped wires with the solder as well. So again, another nice touch. And these just feed down to this Y connector, and that way we can make our connection points from side to side of the vehicle to our lights. And then we just have one wire that runs up to the front, There's plenty of wire here. A lot of times when doing diode wiring on longer vehicles, it can get a little bit tight when it comes to the wiring. I don't think we're going to have issues here, so that's really nice. And eventually this will go to our 4 flat. So now if you're running a 4 flat on the front of your vehicle, that's going to be great. You can just use this plug, which is really nice. But if you're tying into a 6 pole, that's also able to be done. And there's this nice jumper harness, and that's going to allow us to just simply make this quick connection, and then we'll have our 4 pole ends to tie into the 6 pole. So it's going to be very similar to doing diodes on a car, but there's no splicing into taillights. So it's going to keep everything separate. And that's kind of the glory of this kit. You don't have to cut it into factory wiring, and it's really easy. This makes it to where pretty much anyone can do this installation. I think the hardest part is just getting wires ran to the front. So with that being said, a typical installation will start by determining where you're going to mount up your lights. So determining where you want these lights is going to be important. Something to consider if you ever plan on having something in your hitch loaded up. You want to make sure that this isn't going to be blocked by that. You also want it to look decent and also have a nice path to route your wires. Also, as far as contour goes, you do want to have a decent amount facing back for those people, but also on the side, as I mentioned previous. So on our Corsair today, found that this is going to be a decent spot. So first we need to clear off and clean the surface. So I just have some mild dish soap and water here. We're going to wipe that down and make sure that it's nice and dry. We also need to figure out how we want to route our wires back. And in this case, in many vehicles, in the corners by either reflectors or lights or wherever you want to mount these, you may have enough of a gap to get those wires pressed through, and that's what we have here today. So I'm just going to use a trim panel tool to create a nice little gap for us to pass our wires in. Now if you can't find anything, you can also just drill a small hole to be able to pass these wires through. It's really up to you on how you want to get this mounted up. And with my wire tucked back there, I'm happy with the placement. So at this point, I'll just peel off the red backing on our adhesive. And then just take your time getting this set up exactly where you want it. And once you have it in place, I recommend putting pressure on here for a good 30 seconds or so. And you can kind of rub your fingers all around it to make sure that it's evenly pressed on there. And for a little bit of added security, if you want to, you can take a heat gun and just kind of lightly go over here, and that's going to get that adhesive nice and sticky, so long term, these are just going to stay on here. Now once you have the wires passed down, we'll go ahead and make our connection. Now this is if you've never used this style of electrical connection, it's great because there's no butt connectors. These just snap down in place, and it's a really surefire way to make sure that the connection is good. To get this in place, pretty easy here. We'll just take our yellow wire, or really any wire, and you just snap this down. So you'll just pry these up all the way to where they'll be open. And once you snap it down, you should have tension on that wire. So then we'll get our other wire fed in here. And then just give a quick tug on each of them. You do want to slide it all the way in to where it bottoms out. And then once snapped down, that should all hold in place. With our wiring harness, we'll grab the section that's labeled with the corresponding side. We're then going to take our wires and just make sure that they're paired up across from each other. So yellow at the top, white, and then brown. Now with those connected, we'll go ahead and repeat on the other side, but we do want to make sure that this is all mounted up. And something I might recommend doing is get your wire harness started to be ran to make sure that we have enough slack, and that way if we need to, we can pull a little bit further this way. So before we mount this up, let's go ahead, we'll grab that 4-pole end, and with these connected, we can route that up and make sure that we have all the slack that we need. Then we can come back and get that all tidied up. And when it comes to routing that wire underneath your vehicle, all vehicles are going to be a little bit different, some of them easier than others. And You really just need to avoid exhaust. Obviously, it's going to be hot. We don't want to melt the wires or any moving parts, whether it be suspension, axles, even sway bars. I try to omit from getting close to. And a good rule of thumb that you can do to prevent any damage from occurring is following factory wire loom and zip tying up around that. A lot of times is going to give you a clean path up the vehicle. And if you make your way over to the sides, a lot of times you'll have spots that you can either pull a panel down to run your wire up to the front, or at least have wire harnesses along that frame rail to zip tie it up. But the main thing is making sure that wire is not going to be damaged long term by being on your vehicle and underneath it. From there, we'll just route this up and eventually make our way to where we're going to mount up to our 6-pole, and that's going to be on the front of the vehicle. So we have our bracket on our base plate ready to go. So I'll just continue running my 4-pole end up to that, and then from there we can definitely make sure that we have enough wire. At this point, I think we should be okay, but I'll get it ran anyway. Just make sure that you are zip tying it up as you go so it's not a loose wire, but that does leave us with a decent amount of slack. Also leave yourself a little bit of extra slack up front too as a service wire. If you ever need to attack anything or come back to this wire, and you'll have extra to be able to tap into. But we need to make sure that we mount up our junction box where we've tied it all together, and included in the kit is going to be some more 3M tape that we can place on the back side of our junction block and just kind of locate a nice clean surface that's flat that you can attach this to, and that way it's going to be out of the way. But also included, we do have some adhesive zip tie mounts here, and these are nice because you just kind of put this along the wires. If you have excess, you'll peel the backing, and then you can run the zip tie through either way, and that way we can get everything zip tied up. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this all cleaned up, make sure that our wires are tidy. And wherever you place this, it's a good option to be able to put those wire adhesive zip ties in a good spot that we can kind of use that as a cradle for additional support. That way, if that adhesive was to ever give way, we at least have those other ones holding it up. With everything zip tied up, I have my 4-pole routed up here, and if you're going to be plugging into a 4-pole from your RV, then that's pretty much going to do it for this installation. But if you are going to be tying it into a 6-pole, follow along, because that's what we're going to be doing on our application. And that's where our piggyback harness that comes in the kit comes into play. So instead of cutting these wires and trying to gain access, we'll just simply plug this in. And I would recommend maybe taking some electrical tape and just wrapping around just for a little bit of added protection here. And then with our 4 wires, we're going to be ready to splice these into our 6-pole. So make sure you have that ready. And also, if you're doing a charge line on your towed vehicle, now's the time that you're going to want to put this into place. Something that I'll point out is some braking systems are going to require tapping into diode wiring, and you're going to want to do that on this by cutting and splicing with butt connectors, ideally heat shrink butt connectors. You don't want to cut this wire. So if you need to tie into that, you're going to need to run those the braking system wires to these to splice in. And that brings me up to another point. If you're doing just the lighting function, your RV is going to have the ground, but if you're using this for the braking system, or we have a charge line here, we're going to want to run a chassis ground on our towed vehicle, and that's what I'm going to do. I have a little bit of excess white wire here, and I'm just going to use a butt connector to tie into our white wire, and then just use a self-tapping screw to mount this up to the chassis of the vehicle. If you're going to go ahead and do that, now's your time. So with our wires all stripped, I got my ground. I haven't attached that yet, but we can make our connection. And as I mentioned, if you have a charge line that you're going to be putting in line, now's the time to be able to put that in. So we'll take our boot and we're going to slide this back over the wires. And then with our 6-pole, the way that you attach these, you'll see that each of these posts is going to have a molded letter combination, which will determine where this all goes. We'll go through each of the colors to make sure that they're at the right spot, but to get the wires to attach, it's just a small Phillips head screwdriver, and you're going to back this out, not completely, just enough to get that wire fed through. Don't take those out all the way, because if you drop them, they are really tricky to get and find and also put back in place. And then you'll just simply slide the wire in, hold it in place, and then tighten this down. You don't need to crank it too hard. You just want to make sure that it's nice and secure around that wire. You don't want to run the risk of, damaging those wire connections there. So just enough to make that snug to support itself. And I'm going to go through and get the rest of them connected. So our charge line is going to be this tall one here, and then we'll start at the 12 o'clock position. It's molded TM, which is tail marker, and that's going to be our brown wire. So we'll go ahead and get that attached. So going through the connections again, we started at the 12 o'clock position. The TM is brown. So moving over, we have GD, which is ground for white. LT is left turn signal, so that's our yellow. RT is going to be our green wire, so right turn signal. And the S we aren't using, and a lot of times in a flat tow configuration, that's going to stay open anyway. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab some black silicone. I like to coat these ends up, seal it, and that way, as this lives on the front of the vehicle, any weather that you're driving through, it's hopefully not going to get in here and break down those connections prematurely. And now we can slip the boot over the 6-pole plug, and again, I'm going to just take some electrical tape and tape over that connection just to make sure that it, again, just helps waterproof it and just keep it all attached. And something else that you can do, it's up to you. You can backfill this with silicone, and something else that we're going to do is grab some wire loom and tuck that around our wires and into the boot just to kind of give this a cleaner look up front so you don't have a bunch of colored wires. It's just going to look a little bit more cohesive. Now we'll get our 6-pole mounted up on the base plate or bracket, whatever you have. Then, before hitting the road, we need to test to make sure that it works. So we'll be using a test box to simulate this, but if you have your RV ready to go with your umbilical or your 4-pole, we're going to plug in and run through the light signals on the RV and make sure that they're working on our new strips that we attach to our vehicle. And when you run through the light signals, you're going to want to check first the running lights and then also your turn signals. So we'll start with the left, then do our right, and then finally our brakes. Now that they're all installed, I'm really happy with the amount of light that they output. I think this is better than a lot of the diode systems that you tap into vehicles. Sometimes they're just not very bright unless those brakes are really applied, where these ones are pretty noticeable that they have plenty of light. So this is, I think, a great option for really being visible. And when it comes to the installation, it's not much different than doing diodes on a vehicle. The difference is you're not splicing into factory wiring, which definitely gives you peace of mind knowing that this is going to be separate. And long gone are the days of those magnetic lights and bulb and socket kits. This is definitely a great way to go. It gives you a nice clean look with good lights. And again, not having to splice in, I think that's a huge benefit. And it's a little bit more straightforward than diodes, where you're left to kind of a universal fit. This is still universal, but everything's laid out really well. I like the connectors that they have included in the kit. So this really makes it easy for anyone at home to be able to do this on their own vehicle. And that was a look at the Roadmaster Universal Wiring Kit for towed vehicles with a 10-inch LED strip. Hopefully this helps make your flat tow setup that much easier by being able to not have to splice into wires. My name's Brad. Hopefully this helped you.